Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats now. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, good afternoon. Please welcome AFA's Cyber Patriot National Commissioner, Brigadier General Bernie Scotch.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the last official session of this wonderful conference. And it's not an understatement to say that we have another yet very special guest. We have, of course, Mr. Jeff Bezos with us today and General Larry Spencer, former Vice Chief of Staff and AFA's President. General Spencer, over to you, sir.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for being here again. And special thanks to you, Mr. Bezos. We really appreciate you taking the time to come spend a little bit of time with us.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to be here.
So, I have a wife that spends a lot of money. And I live in the D.C. area. And I could be looking for a job soon. So, any announcements you want to make about your headquarters?
Thank you, Larry. We'll make a decision before the end of the year. That's all I can say on that topic. We're excited to make that decision.
Okay, thank you so much.
And I hope your wife is spending some of that money on Amazon.
Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. One of the reasons we're happy to have you is you are right in the wheelhouse of everything that's been going on here the last few days, especially as we talk about innovation. And I think if anyone epitomizes innovation, it's you and your companies. So a lot of questions that have come up the last few days is, how do you encourage employees to be innovative? We've talked a lot here about the frozen middle, how folks will have ideas and they can't get them through. Yeah. A lot of folks are worried about the risk, what's going to happen if I make a mistake. How do you encourage your employees to be innovative?
Well, this is a fantastic and important question. To be innovative, you have to experiment. If you want to have more invention, you need to do more experiments per week, per month, per year, per decade. It's that simple. You cannot invent without experimenting. And here's the other thing about experiments, lots of them fail. If you know it's going to work in advance, it is not an experiment. And what happens in big organizations, Amazon's a big organization now too, the Air Force is a big organization, is that we start to confuse experimentation with operational excellence. So operational excellence is one of our 4 key principles at Amazon. We're building a fulfillment center. We've built over 150 large fulfillment centers around the world now. We know how to do that. That is not an experiment. If we build the 151st fulfillment center and screw it up, that's just a failure. That's not the kind of failure we're seeking. We want failures where we're trying to do something new, untested, never proven. That's a real experiment, and they come in all scale sizes. So you need to teach people that those 2 kinds of failure are different. And you need to have, you said something about that hard middle where ideas don't go up. I think this is such an important thing. At Amazon, one of the things we try to do is have multiple paths to yes. And so here's a little thought experiment for you. If you are a junior executive at Amazon, and if Amazon did this in the typical kind of corporate hierarchy way, you had an idea. You need to get your boss to greenlight that idea, and then your boss's boss needs to greenlight that idea, and then your boss's boss's boss needs to greenlight that idea. There are probably 5 levels or more before that idea gets the go-ahead. Assume instead that you're an entrepreneur with a startup company idea and you need venture capital. You go to Sand Hill Road and you go to the first venture capitalist and they tell you no. And you go to the second one, and they tell you no. Maybe your 20th one tells you yes. You got 19 no's and 1 yes, and you're still good to go. So that venture capital model there's multiple paths to yes. There were 20 people who could give you a yes, and it didn't matter how many gave you a no. So if you want innovative thinking, you have to think about how can we you want a large number of high judgment people empowered to greenlight things. You want multiple paths to yes. And you want a system where, as a junior Air Force officer with a good idea, the first 5 people tell me no, and somehow I can still go pursue that idea. So you got to figure out, that's an organizational challenge that big organizations have to figure out a way to do. And by the way, I get, this happens all the time. I'll say, I don't think that's a good idea, but somebody else will greenlight it. And I'm fine with that, because usually the cost of the experiments is pretty small. Things only get expensive when they work, right? Once something works, you're like, whoa, we need to double down on that. And then the spending can get heavy, and then those become big consequential decisions, and that's where the hierarchy and using the judgment of the most senior people to make this really helps.
Sure.
You also have to select people who like to invent. So that's the other, when you're in your hiring and in your promotions process, you need to say, is this person like to be innovative? Do they have a bit of a pioneering spirit? Maybe they're also a little bit annoying because they might be, a little bit radical or a bit of a rebel. They're not always the easiest people to get along with, but you want them in your organization. And maybe Mavericks.
Let me follow up on that.
They're a spice.
Sure.
I wouldn't recommend having 90% Mavericks.
Exactly. And let me follow up on that, because what I found, at least in my military career, is that oftentimes Mavericks, as you mentioned, are not welcomed.
Yes.
And one of the phrases I really didn't like when I came up, as I was in the Air Force, was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
Well, that doesn't mean you shouldn't make it better.
Yeah, and by the way, your adversaries may be making it better.
Exactly. So how do you handle these Mavericks? That, how do you protect them from the institution destroying them?
Well, I think that has to be culture. You have to teach the value that these people bring, but also I would push hard on the Mavericks to say you also have to be organized. You can't just be a crazy person. So it's fine to be a Maverick, but write your ideas down.
Sure.
Sell your ideas, persuade, create the conditions where the ideas can blossom. You can't get anything done if you're not, if you're just purely a creative person with 0 organizational skills, you're probably not going to get much done.
Sure.
So I would push back on the organization and say, look, these people have an important role to play. And by the way, all of us are a little bit Maverick. So it's not like there are these people that were born Mavericks. I don't think so. We all have this inside of us. If you look at kids, they're all inventive. They're all doing crazy things. I actually saw one time one of my kids put a square peg in a round hole. And as he was doing it, I was thinking, that's never going to work. And then it fit. And I was like, gosh, that's amazing. And so little kids try things, and we all do that when we're little, and some of us lose it. You need to have, one of the great paradoxes of inventing at a high level is that you need to be an expert in your domain area, and you need to have a beginner's mind. You absolutely need both of those things. The world is too complex to actually just be a beginner. So, I can't, no matter how inventive I am, I can't go invent a new kind of brain surgery. You have to be a neurosurgeon. You have to already know all there is to know about brain surgery and then take it to the next level. The problem is, for many people, by the time they become true experts, they've lost that ability to see things in a fresh way. They've lost the beginner's mind. And so that's another thing. You always need to be stepping back and saying, if I'm an expert in launch vehicles or whatever it is, I need to step back and say, okay, if I were looking at this for the first time, what would I be seeing and noticing? These are just some of the things you need to do to be innovative.
Sure. For roughly 80% of my career in the Air Force, we would launch satellites and not think twice about it. Space was considered a sanctuary. Obviously, that changed. So what do you see as the biggest challenges or risk in operating in the space domain?
Well, let's start with the fundamental principle. You never want a fair fight. That's for a boxing ring. Outside of a boxing ring, a fair fight is just bad strategy. And it means you didn't prepare properly. And as you pointed out, this nation has enjoyed incredible space dominance for so long. And it's changing because some of our potential adversaries are getting very sophisticated. And so for me, or if I were in your shoes, the way I would think about this is, in this new era, how are we going to maintain space dominance? What does it really mean? And you're going to need some fundamental capabilities. You have to be able to go to space more frequently with less lead time. If you said, Larry, if you said, Jeff, I have a mission for you. I need you to control this piece of terrain over here. But there are some constraints. I need you to control that piece of terrain, but you can only visit it once a month with a lead time of 2 years. I've just been given an impossible mission. And by the way, when you translate that to space, I'm being very generous with the once a month and the 2-year lead time. The reality is worse than that. So it's not surprising that it's difficult to do that. And it's one of Blue Origin's missions is to make access to space more frequent, ready to go on a moment's notice, lower cost, which requires reusability. All those things are going to be required, in my view, to move into a new era of U.S. space dominance. And believe me, I don't have to tell you guys, you do not want to see that era end. That's a big deal.
Sure. Now, we have a lot of industry partners here in the audience. In fact, the largest number of industry partners we've had attend an AFA session. So what are some of the benefits for your companies partnering with commercial industry?
You have got to, this is a really important general point. It's so important for the DoD, for the Air Force, for every government institution, when they can, to use commercial solutions. And what I find is that when the requirements get written, they're not written necessarily taking that into account in all cases. And so you get something, you end up getting a custom-built system which meets the requirements when a commercial system would have met those requirements, or actually met a different set of requirements, but in a much better way for the capability that's actually being required. And that's a big problem. It's very costly, it slows you down. You want to reserve your custom requirements for things where you really need special sauce, something where there really isn't and shouldn't be a commercial avenue. You know, on writing requirements, I tell our engineers at Blue Origin, good engineers build to requirements. Great engineers push back on requirements. And that's what you need to do. You need to say, is this requirement really needed? Because if we can waive this requirement, then we can use this commercial system. And if you look at, I'd give an example from my own world, which is Amazon Web Services. We're now seeing, fantastic growth from both companies and government institutions and the CIA and the DoD using our using our compute cloud instead of building their own systems. And the reason these companies are doing that instead of building their own data centers in these government institutions and DoD and so on is because the capabilities that they get, there are several reasons, but one of them is that the capabilities they get keep improving kind of auto-magically without any effort. And part of what's going on there is in a system like that, you want co-customers because the co-customers drive the product forward. If you're the only customer of a software system, you're the only one driving it forward. If thousands of customers share that system, then the other 999 that are not you are also driving it forward, and you get that as a tailwind. The analogy I'll give you is that of a personal physician. The last thing you want, Larry, is a personal physician who only services you. Right. Because that person, they'd be available, they'd show up and do house calls, they'd be there anytime, but they wouldn't be, you want a doctor who's seeing hundreds of sick people so that when you have a problem, that doctor has a bunch of data points. How could a personal private physician ever diagnose something? It would be so challenging. You don't want a private doctor. You want a doctor where you want a bunch of co-patients, because those patients are teaching that doctor every day. And that's what happens if you can use a commercial system. You effectively have a doctor who has lots of patients teaching.
Great. One of the great things about this session is I see a lot of folks taking notes. And so let's get specific with the Air Force. How would you recommend fostering innovation specifically with an organization like the Air Force and with Velocity?
Oh, okay. I could talk about this a long time. I'm going to give you the short version of this. Velocity is so important. And in large organizations, it is about decision making. And one of the problems, let me back up just one more piece. What you really want is scale and nimbleness, right? So if you take the US Air Force, one way to make it nimbler would be to make it much smaller. But that's a really bad solution because the scale brings so many advantages. And I see the same thing at Amazon. Amazon, because of our scale, we can do things that we just couldn't ever have done as a garage startup. There's some things that only big organizations can do. I love garage startups. I was a garage startup, but you can't build a Boeing 787 in your garage. You need a big organization like Boeing to do that. So we want scale. We love scale, and you would never trade the scale of the US Air Force for anything. But the question becomes, how do I keep the advantages of scale, but still have the advantages of a nimble startup? How do I get the nimbleness too? I want to be able to absorb a punch because of my scale, and I want to be able to dodge a punch because of my nimbleness. Well, the way you stay nimble is by making decisions fast. In a 20-person startup company, the decision-making speed is so quick. And that's why they're so nimble. And then in a big company or a big organization like the Air Force, that decision-making has a tendency to speed the decision-making. You get high-quality decisions. I think sometimes people think the decisions are low quality. I don't think so. I think you usually get high-quality decisions. You just get them slowly, sure, which is a problem. And so the way to fix that in a large organization, this is what we do at Amazon, is we acknowledge that there are two types of decisions. There are decisions that are, we call them two-way doors. They are decisions where if you make a decision, you walk through the door, and it turns out you made the wrong decision, you turn around, come back. And the consequence of that misstep is small. That's a type 2 decision. That's a two-way door decision. There's a type 1 decision where it's really hard to reverse. When you walk through that door, you have walked through that door. And it's going to be expensive or impossible and time-consuming to reverse that decision. So you have to get that right. That's a high-consequence decision. Those decisions should be made deliberately, carefully, slowly. At Amazon, I find myself on those. I'm the chief slowdown officer. I slow those decisions down. I'm like, no, I want to see this one more way. And the teams working on it roll their eyes, I've already seen it 18 ways, but I thought of a 19th way, and I want to see it. That's correct for a high consequence, irreversible decision. You owe it to your teammates to make those decisions. The problem comes in large organizations is that junior executives, or I'll switch it to officers, junior officers role model senior officers. So they're looking around and watching. And it turns out, rightly, senior officers are mostly making high consequence type 1 decisions that require a slow, deliberate decision-making process. And so then the junior officers are like, well, that must be how we should make all decisions. We'll make all decisions with that heavyweight process. And so now even trivial decisions end up going through a lot of extra unnecessary process to be made, when really many of those decisions should be made by very small teams or by even single individuals with good judgment, knowing full well that they could be reversed. And the senior leadership can set the tone on that. They can say, no, why this decision, why are so many people involved in this decision? I want Jill to make this decision. And whatever Jill decides is fine, and guess what, Jill, if you get it wrong, it's okay. We're just going to back up and do it again. I don't want you to talk to anybody about this. Just go make it.
So I've been here in the hotel since last Thursday. I decided to run home quickly last night to change out some clothes, and typical of my wife, I walked in the door after being gone for several days, and she asked me to take out the trash. Now,
she saved it for you.
She did, but I didn't want to take out the trash, so I was considering, okay, she asked me to take out the trash. Now, what's the risk of me not taking it out? So we're all. This is a group of innovators.
Over a beer, I want to hear how this ended up.
Okay. The Air Force was birthed on innovation, so you have a generally innovative crowd here. However, there is a balance between innovation and risk.
Yes.
How do you balance those two?
Well, here's what I would say is that the winners, when you're doing these experiments, winners pay for thousands of losers.
That's a good point.
So when you're talking about, put it in Amazon terms, we've had a few gigantic winners at Amazon. We've had Amazon Prime, our membership program. Amazon Web Services has been a gigantic winner. Our marketplace business, where we let third-party sellers compete against us on our primary retail real estate. Those are huge winners for Amazon. Each of those winners has more than paid for thousands of experiments. And so when you're talking about the kinds of experiments that you would be doing here at the Air Force, that I do at Amazon and at Blue Origin, the positive outcome is very long-tailed. You can get just gigantic. It's an analogy in baseball. Everybody knows that if you swing for the fences, you're going to hit more home runs, but you're also going to strike out more. Right. And in baseball, the most runs you can score when you're up at the plate is 4. Your upside is capped. It's not long-tailed. In business, and I bet it's true here at the Air Force as well, that upside isn't really capped. Every once in a while in business, you step up to the plate, you swing as hard as you can, and you get 1,000 runs. And so that long-tailed distribution of those possible outcomes is what makes experimenting worthwhile. And so when you're balancing the risk, you say the most I can lose is the cost of the experiment. And the value of the invention could be uncapped.
We obviously live in a very diverse world, a very diverse country, and a very diverse Air Force. What role does diversity play in innovation? Not just race, ethnicity, or gender, but also background.
I think all of those types of diversity play a role in invention and innovation. And what I have seen, the kind of invention that I do every day, and it's going to be very similar here just because of the size of the organizations and the size of the things that you're trying to accomplish. This is team invention. It is not, by the time we end up, Echo is the Echo Alexa, speaker. That is an example of an invention that no customer asked for. If we had gone to customers, 6 years ago or 7 years ago, whenever it was that we put Echo on the drawing board, customers, and we said, look, would you buy a black cylinder that you plug into the wall in your kitchen and you can ask it what time it is, set timers, ask it what the weather is, ask it to play music for you? They'd have been like, no, I will not buy that. And so we invented that, but there was no single person who invented it. It was team invention. And people come at these things because of their diverse backgrounds, which I think does include gender and race and everything else, but also certainly, did you come from a wealthy family? Did you come from a broken home? All these things lead people to think in slightly different ways. And so when you do that team invention, you want people in the room thinking very differently. You're going to end up with a more robust invention.
Our Chief and Secretary have talked a lot this week about talent management and growing leaders. When you recruit folks for your company and you mentor folks in your company, how are you recruiting and mentoring and raising the next Jeff Bezos?
Well, it depends on the seniority of the person you're talking about. I teach a senior leaders class at Amazon, which I enjoy, and there I teach a bunch of different things. But one of the things that really resonates with the folks that I teach there is stress management. And I offer to people that it's part of their job to make sure that they don't get burned out. And I point out to them, I'm a member of the Business Council, and I meet with lots of other kind of Fortune 500 CEOs from time to time. And I often hear them talking about how stressed they are, and there seems to be, I think, this idea that if the more senior you are, the more stress you should have. I think that's the opposite. Because the more senior you are, the more control you have over your environment. To a large degree, you get to pick who your senior staff is. To a large degree, you get to pick your schedule. To a large degree, not 100%, nothing's 100% in this world. To a large degree, you get to decide how you interact. Do you like to do lots of one-on-ones, or do you like to have small group meetings? You have, as a senior executive, you have a lot of control. And what I find is sometimes people forget that they have that control as a senior executive or as a senior officer. They forget that they can construct, to a certain degree, their work environment every day. So, one of the things I try to do is I try to preserve some time that's unscheduled, because I realized, this is several years ago, I realized that hard work never stresses me out, but being overscheduled does stress me out. And so I started working on, okay, what are the ways that I can be less scheduled? So I want to have a series of meetings that are just on standby, that I can do whenever I want. Most speaking engagements that I do, not this one, but most speaking engagements that I do, I say, I can't do it unless I can tell you the day before. And if I can tell you the day before, there's probably a 50% chance or better that I can do it, but I don't want to let you down by canceling. And if I put this poll in my schedule, I know by the time the date arrives, I'm going to regret it. By the way, the weird thing that happens when I do that is I find I'm really excited to say yes and to go do it. So it's because it's just that's some kind of human nature that you don't want to be forced into things. You want to know that it's your choice, and so senior leaders have more choice. The other thing that I try to teach in that regard is I get asked by people at all age ranges, all levels of seniority, what do I think about work-life balance? And my view on work-life balance is that I prefer the phrase work-life harmony. To me, balance implies a strict trade-off. And I have seen situations where people they have all the time in the world. Maybe they're out of work. They have lots of time. They have all the time in the world, and they're so stressed that they're actually terrible at home. Everybody at home is like, boy, I sure wish you'd get a job. And my sister-in-law says, for better, for worse, but not for lunch. And so it's you really want harmony. You want if you're happy at work, if you're finding meaning in your work, if you are, it can be hard. They call it work for a reason. It's not going to be fun all the time. That's a pipe dream. None of us enjoys every minute of every day. And to have that kind of idea would just be naive. But there should be fun at work. You should be laughing. There should be moments of joy. And if you're getting energy from work, instead of your work draining your energy, then you're going to come home and you're going to be a better mother, a better father, a better wife, a better husband, all of those things. You're going to want to take out the trash. And so, even before being asked, that's what's going to happen, Larry. She's going to say, who is this guy? And so, you really need to, I think if you're starting to get to the point where you are worried about work-life balance, I would challenge you to think, is just something out of whack. It's probably not the hours. Look, if you're working 120 hours a week, you're also doing something wrong. That's too much. It's not sustainable. Maybe you can do that for a week or two, but that's it. But if you're working, 60 hours a week, that's completely sustainable for most people. And if you're burned out by it, it's not the number of hours. It's that you're doing something wrong. You need to figure out what it is, because you're going to take that home, and then your home life is going to be stressful, and then you're going to bring that back into the office. So it's going to be a negative spiral, and that spiral will also be a positive one as soon as you turn it around.
Okay, great. Now, I've only known you for a few minutes, but just talking to you in the green room, it's obvious that you like to have fun.
Yes.
So how do you create fun for your companies, the folks that work for you?
Larry saw me eat a hamburger in the green room in about 45 seconds. What do I do? That
was fun, by the way. Like
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
How do you create fun in your work environment?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. First of all, I think that the work itself should be fun. So it's also great to layer on fun. I mean, if I think about the people that I work with, we have dinners together, we have Super Bowl parties together, we have impromptu concerts together. We do a lot of fun things. But the real thing is when you're in the meeting and you're going through the important topics of the day or of the year or of the decade, whatever you're working on, is that fun? And there are these people, when they walk in the room, they bring energy. That person walks in the meeting and everybody gets a little lift. Those people are worth their weight in gold. And by the way, there is another kind of person who, when they walk in the meeting, and you all know this, you feel it. As soon as they walk in the room, it's very deflating. Everybody is like, oh. And don't be that guy. Figure out how to be the first guy. The person who, when you enter the room, everybody is kind of excited. It's not that hard. Every meeting, you should start with some encouragement and end with some encouragement. you can tell people very candid truths in the middle of the meeting that they don't like and don't want to hear. But you can end it on an up note, and you can say, and you can also just say, look, we screwed this up, and we all know it. Even that can be fun.
Sure.
If you acknowledge it, we screwed this up, we all know it. Let's figure out how. Let's find the root cause. I believe in root causes. Finding root causes, fixing root causes, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Everything I have ever succeeded at in life is because of that philosophy.
Sure. There are a couple of things that are certain in life. We've all heard death and taxes. But there's a third one that I'm pretty confident about, and that is your bank account is quite a bit larger than mine. So with that in mind, so not much keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
I would like to have that problem, actually, but I don't. But what keeps you up at night?
Well, I sleep extremely well. So just to put that out there, I am, even when I'm worrying over issues, it doesn't stop me from sleeping. I'm a gifted sleeper. But I know the way in which you mean the question. And at Amazon, because it is such a big company now, and it's grown so quickly. So I started the company in 1995. We opened our doors, so 23 years ago. I'm delivering all the packages to the post office myself. I don't know if you know anything about my personal background. You know, I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. My mother was pregnant with me in high school in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and believe me, in 1964, it was not cool to be pregnant in high school. My grandfather went to bat for her to keep them. They tried to kick her out of high school, and my grandfather said that you can't do that. It's a public school. She gets to finish high school, and the principal finally capitulated. But he said his terms were that my mom could not do any extracurricular activities or have a locker. My grandfather, being a wise guy, was like, done, we'll take that deal. So she finished school. My dad is a Cuban immigrant, and like most immigrants anyway, he loves this country even more than those of us who were born here. And so I started this company, and I'm driving the packages to the post office myself. My big dream is that we will one day be able to afford a forklift. And I'm just trying. It was a tiny, tiny company. Today, it's almost 600,000 people. It's a very large company. And so the answer to your question, you know, metaphorically, what keeps me awake at night, I worry about somehow losing our way with respect to our culture. Our culture is four things: customer obsession instead of competitor obsession, willingness to think long term, longer investment horizons than most of our peers, eagerness to invent, which of course goes hand in hand with failure. You have to. And then finally, taking professional pride in operational excellence. The professional pride part is so important because 90% of what all of you do, nobody ever sees. It's inside the work. People see something finished, but they don't see what's inside it. Only you see that while you're doing the work. And those things can't be great since nobody's seen them. Nobody's inspecting it. You're not going to get any credit for it. The only thing that's going to make you have high standards on that piece of the work that nobody's ever going to see is your own professional pride and operational excellence. Those are the four cultural attributes that are at Amazon. We use the same ones at Blue Origin. We use the same ones at AWS. Those things, if they start to erode at the edges, that would make me very nervous. So I spend a lot of time trying to inspect that, audit that, teach that. Teaching things like that is about repetition. Senior leaders need to be broken records on the things that are important to the organization. And if everybody in the organization, like you have succeeded when you start to see people roll their eyes because of your repetition on certain important things. Because senior leaders don't have to do a lot of things. They have to pick a few big ideas and enforce tough execution against those big ideas. And that requires a lot of repetition.
Unfortunately, our time is going by a lot faster than I thought. I could stay here all day, and I'm sure the audience could too. I think you have a couple of videos you want to show.
I do. I have like 2 or 3 minutes of videos if you want to see
and then
them.
I've got one last question after the video.
Let's roll the, I mean, you can roll them in any order you want, and I'll just talk to them if I can see them. Go ahead, do the New Glenn one first. This is an animation of New Glenn. Okay, the New Glenn is our orbital vehicle. It's 3.85 million pounds of thrust. In terms of thrust, it's about half the size of Saturn V. This is a landing gear. There's 6 landing gears, so we have landing gear out capability. The booster is fully reusable and lands downrange on a ship. It's powered by 7 BE-4 engines. The BE-4s each have 550,000 pounds of thrust, and they're powered by liquefied natural gas and liquid oxygen. The strakes provide good cross range. It's the second stage. This has actually changed since this animation was made. We switched the second stage to liquid hydrogen using our BE-3U engine, which I'll show you a short clip of in a second. Now the booster is coming back in for a landing. We've really stressed availability on this vehicle, and so we have designed the landing ship to be underway so we can stabilize it really well, because we want to be able to land that booster even in heavy sea states. There's the landing. And then, of course, the most important part, payload deployment. So thank you. There's a big team of people working very hard to make all of that come true in the very near future. Next year, I will invest just over $1 billion in that program. If you play the, it doesn't matter what order, play the BE-3 video, I guess, or whatever. Whichever one you play, I'm going to talk about. All right, here's the BE-3. This is a very short video. BE-3U, this is a truncated nozzle version of the BE-3U. It's based on our BE-3PM engine, which is our new Shepherd engine, which is for our suborbital tourism market. This is the BE-4. This is the 550,000 pound thrust engine. It's ox-rich stage combustion, liquefied natural gas, liquid oxygen. The test program's going very well. The team's doing a great job. Let's do the new Shepherd video real quick. This just happened. This is testing our escape system. We'll be putting people in space this coming year. This was our third kind of envelope test of the escape system. It's a solid rocket motor with 70,000 pounds of thrust that takes the crew capsule away from the booster. And this particular test was the high altitude. We were basically already in space just before main engine cutoff is when this would happen in real life. And it's one of the more stressing cases. Watching this
PM touchdown
landing never gets old for me. And then here comes the crew capsule, big windows. And that's the terminal decelerator system kicking up dirt there. And now let's show the landing, the manufacturing facility and the launch pad in Cape Canaveral. These are very short. This is a 650,000 square foot launch facility. That's a drone shot of it. It's up and operating now. As far as I know, we're one of the only launch companies actually building manufacturing right there on the Space Coast. You can go to the launch pad just to show that. Between these two facilities, this is our launch pad. We leased pad 36. at Canaveral. Between these two facilities, the manufacturing facility and Pad 36, we've already invested about $1 billion in the Space Coast. So there you go.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Hey,
One of the reasons I like to talk about how much we've invested is I do want people, especially this audience, to know how committed we are to this. This isn't something that is, we're in.
Sure. The final question is, at the end of the day, in the Air Force, we're about leadership.
Yeah.
And most people will never get to be CEO of a major company. You're the CEO of multiple companies. So what 2 or 3 leadership principles, in your experience, have really helped you manage large organizations?
Well, there are a bunch of them. I mentioned one of them earlier, which I think is the most important thing. If you're really talking about the most senior leader has to know what the big ideas are for their organization. I've talked about this, but I'll tell it. At Amazon, I know what the big ideas are. Low prices, fast delivery, and vast, huge selection. Those are the 3 big ideas. And those ideas are permanent in time. So because they're never going to change, we can put energy into them. And the energy we put in today is going to be paying dividends later. It's impossible to imagine 10 years from now, somebody in this room will come to me and say, Jeff, I love Amazon. I would just wish you charged slightly higher prices. Or, I love Amazon. I just wish you delivered a little more slowly. And same thing with Blue Origin. I know what customers want. These things the big ideas are so obvious. Lower cost, higher availability, more reliability. It needs to work every time. It needs to fly when you say you're going to fly. And it needs to be way cheaper. And then once you identify those big things, then you can build strategies around each of them. What's the strategy around low cost? It's reusability. And by the way, it has to be real reusability. Like the new Shepherd video that I showed you, that vehicle is designed for actual operational reusability. We don't take the thing apart and inspect it between flights. We fly it over and over. If you build a space vehicle that you have to inspect and in an intense way and disassemble and refurbish between flights, that's going to be more expensive than an expendable vehicle. It has to be real operational reusability. So what's the strategy for New Glenn on reliability? Well, one of them is one fault operative. Our entire architecture uses a one fault operative requirement. What about availability? There's a bunch of things. I showed you the landing ship being stabilized underway so that we don't have to worry about the sea states downrange. But there are others too. We have a requirement in New Glenn that launch shall not be delayed by any one sensor being out. So we have one sensor out should not affect availability. We can come up with, so basically once you identify the big ideas and you keep iterating on them and asking the team, what more can we do for availability? AWS has the same thing. Everybody who does cloud computing, what do they want? They want data security. Nobody's going to say, well, I wish my data was just a little less secure. They also want availability. They don't want their service to be down. These things. The great thing about the big ideas is you don't have to launch a research project to figure them out. You know what they are in your head already. That's how big they are. All you have to do is talk about them a lot and make sure that the whole organization is putting energy into them.
Great. Well, Jeff, thank you so much. I can't tell you how much we've appreciated you being here. We know how busy you are. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and spend with us here at the Air Force
If I could
Association.
just, if you do,
Sure.
I say one? I'd just like to make one remark, which is, you get in life you can have a job, you can have a career, or you can have a calling. And if you have a calling, you've really made it. And I believe most of the people in this room have really made it, because what you're doing has meaning, and that matters. And I just want to thank you for that. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Jeff. Jeff, General Spencer, sirs, to say that that was enlightening, insightful, and amazing would be a gross understatement. So on behalf of our thousands of attendees, on behalf of about 100,000 Air Force Association members worldwide, we want to thank you for dignifying our conference with your presence.
I'm so happy to do it. Thank you,
We
guys.
have for you a print of the beautiful Air Force Memorial with the
nice.
Thunderbirds flying over it, and we hope you can display it proudly.
I
Thank
will.
you, sir.
Thank you. You're very kind. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you all. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us the last several days. We really appreciate it. I did want to announce that this is the largest attended conference ever. We saw more than 11,500 folks here this week, which is a growth of 27% over last year. So thank you so much for being here. We hope to see you in Orlando for our Air Warfare Conference in February. So thank you so much. Would you please, if you wouldn't mind, if you could clear the room, because we're going to set up for the dinner here shortly. Thank you so much for attending the conference.